Dr. Brooke Kidding. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine and has focused her career on advancing swine health and welfare within Seaboard Foods' integrated production system. As senior veterinarian, she oversees the commercial health strategy for a system encompassing 280,000 sows and 2.5 million growing pig spaces across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. Brooke collaborates with cross-functional teams to improve animal outcomes while supporting production efficiency. She also holds a master's in animal health and industry from Texas Tech University, where her research explored euthanasia perspectives among Tennessee Visa animal caretakers at Seaboard Foods. Please welcome Brooke Kidding.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Brooke Kidding. I am based out of our Guymon, Oklahoma live operations region. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction of Seaboard, realizing that I am outnumbered by the poultry folks in the room. So a little bit about Seaboard. We are owned by the Seaboard Corporation based in Kansas City. We are the #1 largest U.S. owned and operated pork production company in the United States. So again, we're based out of Guymon, Oklahoma. And I'll talk about our geographic reach on the next slide. But a partnership that you may have heard of, and a bit in addition to our independent plant in Guymon, Oklahoma, we have a partnership with Triumph Foods, which makes Seaboard Triumph Foods based in Sioux City, Iowa. So in our southwestern region, based in this Oklahoma Panhandle region, and also in Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. We have 77 sow farms, which totals about 280,000 commercial sows. And then we have 3 million growing pig spaces with traditional nurseries and finishers, as well as wean to finish space. As you hear about the swine industry and see the mainstream things that pop up in terms of animal welfare opportunity, I would argue that some of the common things that you're going to see relate to anything relating to legal or regulatory areas like Proposition 12. We talk a lot about sow housing. We also talk about, from a veterinarian perspective, we talk about disease mitigation and management. And I'm going to talk about the endemic diseases that we see most frequently in the swine industry that relate to animal welfare. But these are the things that we're going to talk about in terms of like what's going to show up in the news, what are we going to be talking about on National Hog Farmer, things like that. But as a veterinarian who is boots on the ground, working with caretakers every single day, and the challenges that I see in the barns in terms of what are the opportunities to improve animal welfare? It's individual pig care and treatment, so individual animal identification and treatment of compromised animals, and then also caretaker training and timely euthanasia. And so my presentation is going to be focused on these areas, talking about Seaboard's perspective as well as the industry's perspective on these areas. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to use the verbiage that Jennifer talked about, so our program, some core values of our program at Seaboard Foods, starting with the 5 domains of animal welfare. And we know that animal welfare is well defined using this framework, and it is our duty to focus on the 4 assets of what contribute to a mental state. And so nutrition, environment, health, and behavior. And we recognize that although an animal cannot verbally express their welfare, these key indicators can allow us to understand what their mental state is. And so this is kind of the core value of our program, and we know how to define animal welfare using this framework. But as we were looking at our program, we realized that there was something missing in terms of how do we define our actions as leaders and as people who take care of pigs? And that's where our mission statement was born. And in terms of branding, you won't find this on our website. You won't find this posted on our Facebook page because this is for our internal use of how do we hold ourselves accountable as animal caretakers to do right by the pig in everything that we do. And this is applicable when things don't go according to SOP and we have to make decisions around what we're going to do with pigs from a management perspective. And I'm not going to read this to you, and there's not going to be a quiz on what this says, but just understand we have a mission statement relating to animal care. And then the industry's audit tool, which supports our program, the Common Swine Industry Audit, which is an industry-owned and operated audit tool, PACO certified audit tool that we use very extensively in our system to help drive feedback and accountability in the animal welfare space. And so this audit reviews 4 main areas: records, facilities, caretakers, and the animals themselves, and has proven to be a great tool in driving accountability and feedback. This is available on the National Pork Board website, so you can access this online to review the standard and the audit tool itself. But what I'd like for you to know today is that this tool is a comprehensive animal welfare and pre-harvest pork safety audit tool that would evaluate a farm's performance compared to what would be considered industry standard. And so we'll talk a little bit about flagship programs like the Pork Quality Assurance and the Transport Quality Assurance a little later when it comes to caretaker training. But this standard is framed around, and they all kind of tie in together in a perfect way. But this audit tool is, it does have points, 490 point assessment, so very comprehensive, and allows us to evaluate the key areas in which would contribute to the animal's welfare. Specifically for the animals, which is the largest point of the assessment, about half the assessment is dedicated to evaluation of the animals and evaluating lesions and things that put animals in a compromised state. And so scratches, prolapses, tail bitings, things that we see within the swine population that would cause poor animal welfare states. But in terms of how we implement this tool in our system, we try to go above and beyond compared to what other people do in their systems to not only demonstrate our commitment to animal welfare, but get the most out of the audit tool. And so we do internal audits with an auditing team, PACO certified trained auditors that do unannounced assessments. And we also have benchmarks around expectations around scores. And then in terms of our animal benchmarking section, the audit tool well defines how many animals need to be looked at depending on the inventory of the site. We go above and beyond that and bootstrap the entire site, 25%, which is above and beyond the required number of animals to be looked at. And then we'll talk about transportation at the end of the presentation, but it's a section on the audit that's not required to be observed unless it occurs during the audit. And so we have made a point to improve our transportation observations through this assessment by evaluating 20% of our sites with transportation. So I'd like to get into our by phase or by production phase initiatives that we've done at Seaboard Foods to improve the welfare of our animals, starting with a breeding herd or the sows. And in the swine industry, you will hear people talking about sow mortality as a challenge. Our sow mortality rates continue to rise year over year, and we're going to talk a lot about mortality because mortality is an animal outcome and something that we are measuring via numbers. But one of the things that was developed several years ago in terms of sow care and treatment was a specific observation program that uses a flashlight as a tool to evaluate the entire surface area of the sow to determine if she is in a compromised state and needs treated. And so we implemented this flashlight process during key high-risk areas of the sow's life on the farm. And we saw improvements in sow mortality. And we'll also talk about data integration and how we collect data. But up here, I have a sow mortality scorecard. And we actually do administer letter grades for this performance. So I think I'm contradicting a lot of what you said, Jennifer. So we actually do administer letter grades for how they are doing, and then they can benchmark compared to other farms, how they're doing. which has proven to be a very good tool. But as you think about sow mortality contributing factors, one of the challenging things in the industry is the number one cause of death is going to be sudden death, which is obviously a risk because it's uncategorized. We have no idea why they died. And then we go into categories such as lameness, reproductive, something relating to post-pharaoh complication, or pelvic organ prolapse. And then here I have sow mortality over several years, and you can see the waxing and waning that may occur during health challenges throughout the year. But the most important thing I want to show you is compared to, there's a vertical dotted line on the graph on the left side. That's when we implemented this flashlighting procedure. And you can see that over time, sow mortality did begin to decrease and continues to decrease as we've implemented this in our sow farms. But that comes with a cost. When you tell people to treat sows, they will treat sows, and your antibiotic use will go up. And so over time, we saw linear increases in antibiotic use, and I have up here our two most common antibiotics in sows, which is Naxel, aceftiofur, and lincomycin, which is used for lameness. And so we saw an increase in antibiotic use over time. And obviously, from a responsibility standpoint, it's our duty to use antibiotics judiciously. But from a cost standpoint, these antibiotics cost money. And so we came up with an objective measurement in addition to the flashlight process to measure sow illness using rectal thermometer. And so we're temping sows individually to determine whether or not they need antibiotic treatment, and using the backbone and the core of our treatment program of anti-inflammatory drugs. So Banamine and or flunixin-meglumine and dexamethasone. And then in the concept of supportive care, if I probably would have stood up here about 10 years ago and said the word supportive care, people would have looked at me like I had four heads. But recognizing that sows have compromised states and we can medicate them with supportive care to help them through viral challenges such as PRRS. And so there's an immune stimulant called Imufend, and of course electrolytes, which is like sow Gatorade. But we found that when we started using these supportive care methods in the farms, there's three lines on this graph up here. There's a light blue line and an orange line, which is like pre and post break sow mortality. And then the teal line indicates when we started using Imufend. And while it's not obvious that it significantly decreased, it did control some of the abrupt increases in some of the farms in terms of sow mortality, right? So those sow outcomes. And so for 10 cents per sow per day or less than a cent per sow per day, we don't necessarily have the perfect data set that says that it helps improve outcomes, but it's the right thing to do to support them through viral challenge. And then again, leveraging data. One thing that we've been able to input into our dashboards in terms of sow mortality is tracking a percentage of treated ratio. And so treated ratio would either mean flagged or identified to be compromised and treated with some sort of drug. And so we like to see that percentage at least 75% so we can categorize animals correctly and make sure that animals are getting identified prior to becoming mortality. And ultimately, through these sow mortality programs and initiatives that we've implemented, the goal is to improve outcomes for the sows, and by using treatments more efficiently and the use of anti-inflammatory drugs, we can enhance the treatment effectiveness overall within the farm. In the category of lameness, there was a study in 2022 out of the University of Pennsylvania that studied sow lameness causes, and they had concluded that in 75% of the samples or the sows that they observed, they had lesions consistent with a trauma-related infection, which would challenge the current sow lameness thought process that it is a degenerative disorder or OCD type lesions. And so this kind of forced us to think, well, maybe it's the environment that the sows are in versus the genetics or the flooring, that type of thing. And if we can impact the health of the hoof, perhaps we could impact overall lameness scores. And so we gave a foot bath a try in sow farms. This is not the best picture, so please hang tight. So we took that information and we said, well, let's try a foot bath. This is well mimicked in other species, such as dairy. And of course, they're at an advantage because they handle their animals every single day. We don't necessarily get sows out of pens every day. So we had an opportunity to evaluate this. We did it on one farm. We didn't see measurable effects, but we did start implementing this in our boar studs. Boars are susceptible to hoof lesions, cracked hooves that can lead to life-threatening lameness. And so we did implement this in boar studs as a result of this study. But sows demonstrate that they will roll in water if given the opportunity. And so this is the hallway that we set up, the foot bath. We learned very fast that we needed a divider to prevent them from laying down and thrashing. So that's where the divider was built. And the hallway has not looked the same since. So it still looks this way despite multiple rounds of power washing and disinfectant. But industry-wide, since 2013, there's been an increase in pelvic organ prolapse rates across the entire industry. And this was data out of the Iowa Pork Industry Center that it covers about 400,000 industry sows. And you can see there's 3 lines, and there's obviously the worst performing in terms of pelvic organ prolapse can reach rates of 8% of the sow mortality can be attributed to pelvic organ prolapse. And then even the lowest is right around 2%. And so animals with prolapses are severely compromised. And what we learned is, and apologize, this is before lunch, so this is a prolapse, rectal prolapse. And what we learned was that we can fix these. So we can remove the animal from a compromised state by fixing these on the farm. And we can cull this animal and avoid having that poor outcome of euthanized head, because prolapse is euthanasia criteria in the swine industry. So these animals are euthanized upon identification normally, but we realize we can fix these. There's no controlled drugs involved. I can train people to do this. And so we started doing it. And over time, again, you can't really see a sharp decrease in prolapse mortality year over year, but what I can probably justify is it did control the seasonal occurrence that we do see year over year. So at the end of 2022 to 2023, we saw an increase over the winter time. And it seems like the highest number that we've seen this past year was lower comparatively. And we do save sows with this. So I do know that there's value. You may just not see it in the numbers. There's been a lot of data generated on causative factors of pelvic organ prolapse. And again, a lot of this is unknown to the industry. It continues to be studied. One of the things that's been pretty well documented is body condition scoring animals and its relevance to pelvic organ prolapse rates, and that lower body condition animals or sows are more prone to pelvic organ prolapse. And one thing that we do in our system that relates to this, there are other implications for it, but we measure body condition scores in animals multiple times per year and measure their feed boxes accordingly and feed them according to what they need in terms of body condition measuring. So this is a sow caliper. It measures the width of the back and determines what her body condition score is. And then from there, we determine how much feed she needs. And so there, like I said, there's other implications. We know that sows need a finite amount of feed to keep at maintenance. And so if given the opportunity, she's going to eat as much as she wants. So we measure body condition score and feed them, appropriate to what they need for either maintenance or to improve body condition. And then sow culls. So similar to other industries, there is a culling process in our breeding herds where we remove animals from the population for a specific reason. And so part of this naturally includes removing an at-risk animal from the farm, shipping her, and then taking her to a plant. And so if we don't do this, it results in animals being euthanized on the farm, which is obviously a poor indicator. So we want to cull animals early and as often as possible to bring new animals or replacement gilts in. So there's a study done in 2021, which kind of opened the swine industry's eyes in terms of what the cull market really is. And so what we think is when I'm sending a cull animal, she's probably going to be to a plant within 24 to 36 hours and be slaughtered for human consumption. But what this study indicated was that that's not always the case. And there are sows in the system that will go to multiple buying stations and stay multiple days in the system before she reaches a plant and is slaughtered. And so not only from a disease traceability standpoint, right? When I ship a cull sow, she stays in the system for 5 days. That's a risk. But it also indicated that the animal that I'm sending on the truck may have longer than I thought to live. And the quality of animal that I ship on the truck matters. Because if she has to make it through the cull market over 5 days versus 1 day, that's a problem. And so continued focus on culling decisions in our system and making sure that we cull the right animals and we accept euthanasia as an outcome for animals is important. Talking about the piglets, so we're still at the sow farm. We have a metric called pre-weaning mortality, so pigs that die while in the farrowing house on the sow. And this is data out of PIC North America, which is a genetic company here in the United States, all across the world, actually, but this data is from North America. So, and they indicated that piglet survivability across their genetic line varies, but the lowest rates that we're seeing is 78%, which means 22% pre-weaning mortality. So 22% of the pigs that are born alive will die before 3 weeks of age or before the time that they are weaned. And so, again, obviously a risk in terms of animal outcomes and something to consider when we think about animal welfare, but piglets are at risk. Piglets are, they're not born with fat reserves. They're tiny compared to their mother. They are not able to regulate their body temperature very well. They have no hair when they're born. And so they're at risk for a lot of things. And we are charged with taking care of them and trying to improve those outcomes. And so there's a lot of different management strategies that can be used in sow farms, including management of the sow and the piglets. And so we can commingle piglets with different sows based on their size and ability to compete for teat space. And then there's other things that play a role, and I'm going to talk about spot treatment specifically, but farrowing room sanitation. And so we wash farrowing rooms in between every group. Washing and sanitation is extremely important. Obviously, the sow, her health and her immunity is going to be important for the pig's survival. And then the environment of we ventilate and we heat and we cool, and especially where we're located, where we do all those things throughout the year, and we have extremes of both. So in terms of spot treatment, and I'm talking about identifying a pig that is sick and needs to be treated with either an antibiotic or an anti-inflammatory, we know that it makes a difference. And so we had a group of farms that broke with PRRS. I have on here, one of the arrows indicates when they broke with PRRS. We got on them and we said, you got to be treating pigs. They treated pigs and they saved like 1,000 within a week. And so as you can see, one of the challenges with PRRS is you do get variation as you have different immune statuses coming into the farrowing house, and that's a natural expression of PRRS, and that's what makes it challenging. But we know we can control that variation with spot treatment. So the pigs, they're going to wean from the sow farm and they're going to go into a nursery or a wean to finish site. And just broadly speaking, wean to finish mortality is a concern within the industry. So pigs that place in a wean to finish site or a nursery, what percentage of those pigs end up making a full value pig? And so this is some data, industry data. This is not Seaboard data, but this is showing you some wean to finish mortality rates across the industry And you can see that the highest here is reaching about 13%, but that's not even the worst performing flows in the industry. And again, this is just a snapshot of the industry. This is not the entire industry, but the worst performing flows are going to reach 18, 19% wean to finish mortality. So obviously concern of an industry that says, well, we take care of pigs, and seeing mortality rates like this would indicate otherwise. And so it starts with the quality of the pig that's weaned. We've done the work at Seaboard. A lot of people have done the work at Seaboard to demonstrate that wean to finish mortality can be impacted by the age of the pig that leaves the sow farm. So up here, I have a study that we did in 2020 at Seaboard, and we basically demonstrated that initial placement weight also does the same thing, but we know that initial placement weight and wean age are correlated. So an older pig is going to be a heavier pig. And so we saw that as heavier pigs placed, they had improved average daily gain, and they had improved wean to finish mortality compared to those that were placed at lower weights. And this matches with industry data saying that pigs that are of older age will have improved wean to finish mortality compared to pigs that are younger. And this is our wean age. So wean age is going to be the first thing that's compromised in a sow farm when you're pushing production efficiency. When you're trying to wean as many pigs as possible, your wean age is going to suffer. And so we will have variations through the year based on health challenges, needs of the nurseries and finishers markets. And so you can see this wax and wane throughout the year, but we have to learn our lesson that our wean age has to increase. And so you'll see that increase here. And the blue line is this year. We're trying to take that back up to 20 to 21 days. In terms of causes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the endemic diseases that we see, PRRS and PED being the number 1 and number 2 reasons for compromise in our industry. But there are other diseases, porcine circovirus 2, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, swine influenza virus. And then we get into management causes such as labor, not only availability, but training, and then also the workload. From the standpoint of PRRS, so this is definitely our most devastating endemic disease, a viral disease of pigs that last estimate has us costing us over $1 billion per year in our industry, not only from reproductive losses at the sow farm, but what will manifest as respiratory disease in downstream pigs and cause losses in pigs as well. Continue to see strain diversity and increased virulence of strains come throughout the industry, which makes it extremely challenging to manage. And there is no good vaccine. There is no good management tool that is reliable and consistent. And so continues to plague us in the wean to finish category. From a PED standpoint, definitely more applicable in the sow farm. You will have up to 100% loss of your neonates, so pigs that are nursing on the sow. But once those pigs get out into nurseries and finishers, they can be compromised with diarrhea, dehydration, and mortality. But PED previous to 2013 was a foreign animal disease. It was introduced in 2013 and affected most of the sow herds in the country at that time. And we continue to get up to epidemic status across the industry year over year. And you can see that it typically is the winter time between December and February. So there is a seasonal component to this as well. And then we get into the discussion of these viral challenges lead to compromised pigs. And so this is a PRRS positive pig that has been affected by PRRS. And so these pigs go into the nursery, they get commingled with a bunch of non-litter mates. They're in a brand new environment. They're forced to learn how to eat feed. And so how do we take care of these pigs in addition to just identifying these pigs that need to be treated or sorted off, but providing them the nutrition either through gruel feeding. And so we're putting pans in pens, we're putting mats in pens, we're mat feeding pigs, we're gruel feeding pigs, we're sorting pigs. A lot of labor goes into making sure the pig is in the right place that it needs to be given the best chance to survive. And so we definitely demonstrate our commitment to this through these compromise pig restart programs that we do, which can make a difference in a pig's life. And then also my job as a veterinarian is leading health initiatives and making sure that we're using antibiotics appropriately. So mirroring that of the SOW system, using flow charts in the most common way that people learn is visually and teaching them in the barn. And so using what we know works, and here's an example of that. We've also done some studies internally, again, using anti-inflammatories as a core value of our treatment program. We know and we've demonstrated that using anti-inflammatories in the grow finish phase, which is a poorly explored area, to be frank, most people are going to use antibiotics only, but if we use injectable anti-inflammatories, we can reduce mortality in those sort pens by almost 10%. So we know that there's value in pairing them together and using them together in specific scenarios. Another area within the wean to finish category that is a welfare concern is hernias. And so this is an umbilical hernia that is on the screen. Umbilical hernias, there's several causes, but essentially there's going to be some sort of weakness of the abdominal wall from trauma or infection. And this is going to go back to how the cord is handled at birth, what environment the pig was born into, and that sort of thing. So we recognize within the industry these welfare concerns. Obviously, they can be painful, they can risk mobility, and then they can also have very life-threatening complications, either necrosis, infection, anything can happen to these things, and they also can become ulcerated and perforated, which is a huge concern in a pen-related environment. And so how do we in our system control the prevalence? So we put a huge emphasis on farrowing house sanitation. There are other implications other than hernias. Also, like farrowing house scour prevalence is related to farrowing house sanitation. Put a huge emphasis on this about 1.5 years ago, and has proven to pay off. We also pick every pig up within 24 hours of birth. We handle their umbilical cords. We spray them with iodine. And we also use an antibiotic at birth because there is very good data to support that that area is colonized by bacteria very early. And if we use an antibiotic at birth, we can control those rates. And you can see I have some data, internal data here, that we reduced by over 1% in the finishing phase, which justifies its use. If you multiply that over the 8 million pigs that we market every year, that percent makes a difference. We also have put in additional labor and more time into marketing these pigs sooner. So a topping load is going to go into a finisher barn, and they're going to pull out the biggest pigs in the barn, and then they're going to let the other pigs grow. During this topping procedure, we found that if we go in and we take tops out and we take these umbilical hernias out early, they're not going to be a full value pig, but if we take them out early, we prevent them from dying later in the phase. And so if I prevent them from being euthanized or dying, I can market them sooner, then that's a win in our book. And so we started implementing this about 6 months ago, and again, have seen improvements in our mortality by over 1%. Now I'd like to talk about timely euthanasia. And I don't need to stress the importance of timely euthanasia in terms of our duty when it comes to taking care of animals. Timely euthanasia is a piece of that because we have the capability to minimize pain and distress, remove animals from the population that need to be removed, and ultimately it supports our standards of animal welfare and animal care. There are challenges when it comes to performing euthanasia, and specifically the work that's been done in the swine industry and replicated across multiple livestock species. But the challenges are obviously caretakers identifying that an animal meets euthanasia criteria and needs to be removed from the population, but also the emotional challenges that come with performing euthanasia every single day. And something that we did at Seaboard Foods, and I'll talk about why we did this survey, it came along a process change But we did a survey of our Spanish-speaking animal caretakers, and I'll talk about why that's relevant later as well. But we had over 250 people participate. Most of them were TN visas from Mexico, and we asked them questions relating to euthanasia process. And we found that over 20% of people said that they do not like to euthanize animals as part of their daily duties, which is obviously a concern because if they don't like to do it, they're not going to do it as frequently as you would like them to. We also found that people that indicated that they identify an animal meeting euthanasia criteria and they euthanize that animal themselves felt that they were 21 more times likely to identify an animal that meets euthanasia criteria and have someone else do the euthanasia. So indicating again that they may be able to identify that the animal needs euthanized, but they emotionally don't want to do it. And so that's a challenge when we talk about timely euthanasia, and especially in health challenge situations where pigs are needing euthanasia more frequently than a healthy barn of pigs, of course, can impact animal welfare. And this survey came along a process change that we did in our sow farms relating to piglet euthanasia. And so, within the industry, carbon dioxide is still the #1 euthanasia method for piglets less than 20 pounds. At Seaboard, we felt like we could be better and we could choose something else. And so we ended up choosing non-penetrating captive bolt gun as our first choice euthanasia method. And this unit made by Bach Industries in the United States was what we choose to use. And again, if you can get behind that, the humaneness of a euthanasia method is determined by the time to insensibility and the ability to not cause pain to the animal, then this is an acceptable euthanasia method. And so this is what we went with. And we studied this transition via that survey, comparing their opinions on both carbon dioxide and non-penetrating captive bolt gun, which is where that data came from. And again, TN visas. So TN is Trade NAFTA. It's a program between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and it allows us to recruit workforce from those two countries. For us, 76% of our workforce are from Mexico, TN visa workers that come to the United States with a bachelor's degree or some sort of higher education experience in the industry, and the ability to work in the United States. And so when you think about caretaker training, the flagship programs that we have from the National Pork Board, which is PQA and TQA, we obviously have a good foundation in terms of how we train caretakers and the consistency across the industry. But there are challenges, language barriers aside. Okay, I do not speak Spanish. A lot of the people in our leadership do not speak Spanish, but language barriers aside, people learn in different ways. And you talk about across speaking groups and cultural diversity and all that stuff, we have challenges in terms of what's the perfect balance to train someone the way that you want them to understand the concept. And so as it relates to the swine industry, there's no perfect balance. No one's been able to perfect this, but in our system, we do a combination of a lot of things, but we do not underestimate the value of in-barn training and spending time with people and teaching them in person with the pigs. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about transportation, and my case study is on transportation, so I don't want to spoil a lot of the information, but transportation is a risk in terms of we have hundreds of millions of pigs that go on the road every single year, so over 200 million. And there are obvious risks in terms of thermoregulatory concerns, either heat stress or cold stress, and then outside of the overcrowding or handling, slips, trips, and falls, dehydration, fatigue, transit times, all concerns within the industry that need to be addressed and people are working to address. But with something that has so much concern, we do not have a good way to measure outcomes in this area. And the only outcomes we measure are actually negative outcomes. We measure DOA, which is dead on arrival, and killed on arrival, KOA. And so, and in terms of in-barn observation, we have the common swine industry audit, And again, transportation does not need to be observed every single time, only if it occurs during the audit. And it does evaluate all the main areas around animal welfare and transportation, but we don't have very many observation points with this. And so this presents a challenge. And again, measuring negative outcomes, so DOAs versus KOAs. And another thing that we started measuring was average load times can be an indicator to help us understand how well pigs are moving. And so that's something that we track week to week. So I'll leave you with some closing thoughts. I think I demonstrated or conveyed that we are a very large system with a lot of farms. We have almost 1,000 farms in our system, marketing over 7 million pigs per year. And I just want to demonstrate that hopefully you saw a snapshot of some of the initiatives that we've taken to improve individual pig care. And hopefully it can serve as a reminder that even the biggest systems can drive change. It's not just a small producer. It can be the big guys and the corporate guys too. And one thing that we've learned is it's not always the big things that we do. It's the small things that add up over time, the consistency that we drive that makes the biggest improvement. And everyone in the organization has the power to make a difference. It's not just my duty to improve animal welfare. It's everyone's in the organization, and we share that responsibility at Seaboard Foods. And I don't know if I have time for questions, but you can find me after and would be happy to chat. Thank you.